They told him to write something exciting. Little did they know Lalo Schifrin's urgent scribble would become an electrifying anthem that audiences would still be humming more than half a century later. That is precisely the moment our story begins. And today, we are diving deep into the pulse-racing world behind one of the most iconic pieces of theme music ever composed. How did a talented Argentine jazz pianist, fresh from collaborating with Dizzy Gillespie, become the mastermind behind the enduring Mission Impossible theme? And why has it never lost its hypnotic five-beat charm? In this episode, we will unravel the fascinating origin story, examine the legend of a nearly rejected march tempo, and ask whether that toe-tapping groove was truly inspired by a Dave Brubeck jazz classic, or something far more unexpected and cryptic. Buckle in, because the answers might just blow your mind. What is the real story behind Mission Impossible and its unstoppable theme song? And how does Schifrin's background in jazz improvisation and cinematic scoring blend together so seamlessly to produce such an adrenaline-pumping effect in just a few heady bars? Today, I will guide you through the intriguing details of a remarkable man's life, the inventive use of dots and dashes that changed television music forever, and the enduring cultural sway of a melody first recorded in the mid-1960s. In this special deep dive, we will also investigate why Hollywood's biggest players are still clamoring to use that sonic brand in the modern era, and the reason it remains a potent lure for car chases and explosive set pieces. So, make sure you stick with me, because in this installment, we will tackle the story of Lalo Schifrin's lesser-known jazz roots, the role of Morse code in shaping the most recognizable rhythmic pattern in espionage entertainment, and how Schifrin's risky time signature continues to captivate entire generations. We will also explore how Schifrin managed to capture not just the essence of suspense and danger, but also the cool, sophisticated vibe that became synonymous with Mission Impossible and its unstoppable espionage team. Now, get ready for a revelation. Lalo Schifrin originally proposed a march-like tune for this series, only to have it turned down. That rejection triggered a creative eureka moment that catapulted him to superstardom. Keep watching to learn the bizarre chain of events that led to Schifrin's frantic scribbling of the iconic 5/4 vamp in a matter of mere seconds. Before we delve into the meltdown that spawned the final version of this theme, let us take a brief moment to keep in mind Lalo Schifrin's backstory. Born in Argentina, Schifrin showed an early talent for music. He studied both classical piano and discovered jazz, forging a combative but ultimately synergistic partnership of styles in his own compositions. This gave him a unique vantage point in Hollywood, where producers approached him for cutting-edge scores that could push the boundaries of mainstream sound. By the time Schifrin arrived in the United States in the 1950s, he had already accumulated a reputation for complex rhythms and harmonic flair, informed by both Argentine traditions and the swirling jazz scene that encompassed luminaries such as Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and, of course, Dizzy Gillespie. Although Schifrin attained significant attention from his collaborations and from other Hollywood film scores, Bullet, Dirty Harry, Cool Hand Luke, The Amityville Horror, among many others, nothing would outshine Mission Impossible. That short TV theme, a double dash and double dot pattern set to a swirling spy motif, became the perfect marriage of cinematic flamboyance and jazzy sophistication. When the series first hit the airwaves in 1966, the tune was so distinctive that it immediately glued audiences to their screens. The show's producers recognized that Schifrin's theme was its own brand, a miniature symphony of intrigue and tension, so important that it was the last element viewers heard before plunging into the weekly escapade of sabotage, infiltration, and illusions. Time to drop our first big revelation. Lalo Schifrin's 5/4 pattern is not, at its core, an imitation of Dave Brubeck's famous Take 5. Surprised? Many of us have made the easy assumption that Schifrin simply latched on to the success of the Brubeck Quartet's disruptive use of odd time signatures in jazz. After all, Take 5 was a smash hit that introduced commercial audiences to the mesmerizing off-kilter groove. But Schifrin had a more clandestine source for his theme's 5-beat foundation, the letters M and I in Morse code. That is right. He took the two letters representing Mission Impossible, the dash dash dot dot of Morse, and assigned them rhythmic values. Then, adding a dash of melodic tension and percussion flair, he crafted the tune that would be forever tied to explosive espionage. Of course, critics have asked if Schifrin's internal storehouse of rhythmic influences also contained a strong memory of Take 5. And if so, does it matter? The composer himself name-checked Brubeck's earlier track as being in his heart, but insisted the real impetus was that M and I translation. This dual alignment with jazz's willingness to experiment and the show's demand for something thrilling gave Schifrin carte blanche to deliver an earworm unlike any other in television history. Now, imagine you are part of the creative team behind Mission Impossible in 1966. The producers set down a general rule. We need the bomb fuse to ignite visually right at the top of the credits, and your music should feel explosive. No actual script pages, no footage to guide the composer, and no detailed instructions on tempo or melody, only the terse command to set an adrenaline-fueled tone. Schifrin's first attempt, something in a more traditional march meter, got unceremoniously booted. In the scramble to meet the show's deadlines, the composer hurled caution aside, turned to the piece of blank staff paper in front of him, and wove a 5/4 tapestry of unstoppable momentum. Yet the story did not end there. Even after Schifrin's new track was recorded by top studio musicians, it was unclear if it would be the surefire hit the show demanded. The producers, star Martin Landau recalled, started hearing that dynamic bass line, the bongos and the shimmering flutes, and realized instantly they had something special. Landau, who portrayed the shape-shifting Roland hand on the show, said that he walked into the session, listened, and was stunned. There was simply no going back. It is at this emotional peak that I would like to encourage you to show your appreciation for masterful craftsmanship. If you find this story amazing, gently take a moment to give your support, perhaps by leaving a little mental like in your mind or a symbolic thumbs up. It is a simple act, but it really does help keep this conversation alive. From those early days, Schifrin's credentials in the jazz world and his fearless approach to synergy in film scoring would lead him to even more shining accomplishments. Collaborations included working with Dizzy Gillespie on advanced jazz concepts, as well as bridging tango traditions of his Argentine homeland with biting modern harmonies. This cross-pollination shaped the blueprint for the edgy atmosphere that made Schifrin an ideal candidate to score films with raw energy. Think about how a film like Bullet, starring movie icon Steve McQueen, relied on music to keep the tension razor sharp. As a result, Schifrin was soon inundated with Hollywood offers. The success of Mission Impossible alone might have been enough for his star to shine, but add in the music for Dirty Harry or Enter the Dragon, and suddenly you see the unstoppable creative force that drove him forward. So, we have established that Mission Impossible was never just a one-off in Schifrin's career. But ironically, for all the film scores he wrote, for all the accolades, like his 6 Academy Award nominations and multiple Emmy nods, it was that ephemeral creation for a television series that would become his ultimate calling card. There is an important lesson in there about the fleeting nature of art and how the micro-event of a swiftly composed piece of music can overshadow the carefully orchestrated film scores that took months to refine. Indeed, the Mission Impossible melody was scrawled out in about 90 seconds, according to the composer. That is well under 2 minutes for the creative spark, and yet the impact was nothing short of seismic. The hallmark of that spark, of course, is the unstoppable 5/4 meter that keeps the audience off balance. A march rhythm or a waltz might lull us into familiar territory, but an asymmetrical groove, with that extra beat, prods us forward. It is somewhat like climbing a set of stairs where every landing is unexpectedly shifted, and you never get comfortable. Schifrin was keenly aware that the novelty factor itself was a kind of tension. Listeners simply did not experience 5/4 rhythms often. Hence, from the very first seconds, your brain is subconsciously on high alert. Schifrin chose a vamp that repeated with a vamping bass progression, anchored by drums that ratcheted up suspense with cyclical patterns. Then, to complement it, he inserted a swirling flute and occasional brass stingers. This gave the theme a vibrant, propulsive, and slightly dangerous feel. Before you knew it, each episode of the original Mission Impossible series unfolded with an aura of looming hazard, almost guaranteeing your eyes stayed riveted to the screen. And that, by design, was precisely what the producers demanded when they said, "Write something exciting." It was not the first time in television history that jazz influences crept in. The famous Peter Gunn theme, composed by Henry Mancini, made waves a few years earlier, but Schifrin's approach was far more radical in terms of meter and exotic flourishes. Clearly, the show's creators loved that sense of risk. However, in a fun twist of fate, the track only ever reached number 41 on the charts, never truly cracking the top 40. Despite that, its longevity dwarfs that of many chart toppers. While you could easily compile a list of Billboard hits from the same era that have faded from public consciousness, the Mission Impossible theme has effectively become embedded in pop culture, and not just in the United States, but internationally. Why does it still hold such pervasive power over audiences? In part, it is the context. Whenever we hear those 5 beats tumble out in urgent syncopation, we anticipate unstoppable heroics. Perhaps a breakneck car chase, a cunning infiltration, or some sly sabotage. The music cues an entire cinematic and televisual tradition, from the original series to the multi-billion-dollar movie franchise headlined by a modern superstar. While technology and special effects have changed drastically since the 1960s, that unrelenting 5-beat pattern remains untouched because it is so inextricably linked to the brand's identity. Another point worth discussing is how Schifrin's composition set the stage for future heroic themes. His approach was an heir to a long lineage of music for legendary figures. For centuries, from the epic poems of ancient Greece to the triumphal processions of medieval kings, we have used music to anoint heroes and give them shape in our collective culture. The principle never changes. If you can hum their melody, you are already connected emotionally to their journey. And it is that heroic tradition that Schifrin tapped into, with modern instrumentation and a brand new rhythmic approach. Indeed, for the average filmgoer looking for that rush of adrenaline, the Mission Impossible theme is an immediate invitation to witness the extraordinary. That is why Tom Cruise, when he decided to resurrect the property for a major motion picture in 1996, insisted on paying homage to Schifrin's composition. In the lead-up to the film's premiere, Cruise found himself in the same room as the unassuming Argentine composer. Although many of the younger Hollywood crowd did not recognize Schifrin, Cruise did. He approached with an enthusiastic grin, offered a big hug, and thanked Schifrin for providing the very heart and soul of the new cinematic chapter for Ethan Hunt's adventures. But the narrative only gets more impressive. As the franchise expands, spanning multiple sequels and raking in staggering box office revenue, producers and directors consistently anchor the marketing campaigns around that signature riff. Sparks and explosions flash, Tom Cruise defies gravity with daring stunts, but the real goosebump moment for audiences is always when we hear the first unstoppable blasts of that melody. Without that, would the new generation of viewers still connect the same way? Probably not. In this sense, Schifrin's creation transcends typical pop culture ephemera to become a timeless signifier of cunning, bravery, and possibility. Let us pause here for a second to reflect on the unstoppable nature of certain theme songs. Many of our beloved cinematic heroes, from James Bond to Indiana Jones, rely heavily on their signature melodies to amplify their heroic qualities. Think of the insistent guitar-driven Bond theme or the swashbuckling brass of Indiana Jones. These songs are instant emotional triggers, telling us that we are about to witness something extraordinary. This is simultaneously a marketing tool and an ancient storytelling technique. The deeper reason these themes resonate is because the easiest way to fortify a hero's presence in our imagination is to give them a musical calling card. That is also why these compositions outlast the stars themselves. Despite repeated cast changes, reboots, or shifting production styles, the iconic melodies endure. Schifrin's Mission Impossible might just be the quintessential example of that phenomenon in modern American entertainment. The entire brand identity owes so much to those angular intervals and swirling rhythms. Even if future films diverge drastically in terms of style or storyline, it is unimaginable they would ever ditch that iconic motif. Now, if you are as enthralled as I am by the universal magic of heroic theme songs, feel free to subscribe to whatever channel or source you prefer, because we have plenty more stories lined up. Tales of composers, their near-miraculous moments of inspiration, and how a single piece of music can change the destiny of an entire franchise. Trust me, you would hate to miss those future deep dives. Returning to Schifrin's masterpiece, I would argue that the real key to its success may lie in the composer's refusal to settle for the cliché. He embraced jazz's restless spirit, weaving a tapestry of unpredictable chord changes and spicy instrumentation. The influence of his collaborations with influential modern jazz artists cannot be overstated. A typical film or television composer might have delivered something more soothing or more in line with popular tastes. Instead, Schifrin brought an avant-garde sensibility under the veneer of a playful spy motif. This was actually quite a gamble, especially during that era. Producers were more accustomed to safe, hummable melodies that repeated themselves in symmetrical patterns. Putting the audience off balance with a 5-beat loop was not an obvious route to success, but it was exactly the kind of creative risk that set this series apart. And while others have tried to emulate or update the theme through the decades, adding electronic beats or layering on orchestral swagger, the underlying notion remains very much Schifrin's. Behind the scenes, the process of recording that original theme is also worth noting. The day designated for the session brought together top-tier Los Angeles studio players who were used to the rigors of fearsome sight reading. However, Schifrin's piece was a different breed. Crisp percussion, flute lines that soared above the ensemble, and a driving sense of urgency all combined to create an unusual dynamic. Musicians like Emil Richards on bongos came to define that creeping sense of momentum that undergirds the entire structure. Bud Shank, presumably on flute, contributed the shimmering melodic statements that gave the track its exotic flavor. The entire ensemble had to commit wholeheartedly to an experiment in odd meter. Yet the session ended up capturing an energy seldom heard in TV themes. Some folks have suggested that part of the reason the track never soared to the top of the pop charts rests in its unorthodox rhythmic feel. People can tap their feet to a standard 4/4 or even 6/8 with ease, but 5/4 is enough to trip up the average listener. However, that same unusual quality gave the theme an instantly memorable identity. You might not be able to snap your fingers along perfectly, but that sense of suspense is precisely why the tune remains so distinctive. As the decades rolled by, Schifrin's professional life sparkled with collaborations across the spectrum of music, from jazz festivals in Europe to experimental music in South America and mainstream Hollywood features. When the first Tom Cruise-led Mission Impossible film arrived in 1996, Schifrin found himself in an unusual position, invited to the premiere of a blockbuster that was reaping the cultural dividends of a short TV snippet he had dashed off about 30 years earlier. He turned 64 that same week, and the difference in age between him and the 20-something production assistants on set was as wide as the cinematic gulf between the Cold War era and the digital 90s. Yet there was a moment of recognition when Cruise saw Schifrin across the room, rushed over, and enthusiastically embraced the composer, crediting that signature melody for fueling his own excitement about the film. In the years to come, additional installments featuring Tom Cruise would smash through box office records worldwide. Younger audiences, with no memory of the original television show, got introduced to the concept of the impossible missions force, all while hearing the same mesmerizing refrain that older generations watched Martin Landau and the crew relish in black and white or color televisions. The cyclical generational handoff is key to the theme's longevity. New fans discover the melody as if it were brand new, while older fans enjoy the nostalgia of seeing it reimagined for bigger and more audacious stunts. Lalo Schifrin passed away at the grand age of 93, leaving behind an extraordinary legacy of compositions that spanned multiple genres. Yet among his many achievements, it is that explosive short piece of music, born out of a tight deadline, a dash of jazz irreverence, and a cryptic reference to Morse code, that will undoubtedly continue to define his cultural imprint. Decades from now, even if movie franchises expand in ways we cannot imagine, that spiky 5-beat intro still promises to coax us to the edge of our seats. Indeed, if you study the evolution of cinematic and television theme music, you discover that many theme songs have come and gone, but only a few have penetrated the global consciousness in such a permanent, intergenerational way. James Bond, Star Wars, and perhaps the theme to Jaws are among a handful. Yet there is something about the raw tension of Mission Impossible's staccato calls and swirling polyrhythms that sets it apart. After thousands of listens, it never fully fades into background noise. Instead, it demands that you pay attention. It literally invests you in the story of infiltration and sabotage unfolding on screen. As you have seen, the entire phenomenon traces back to that improbable moment when Schifrin, faced with a looming deadline, refused to settle for a safe, plodding march. He turned to a concept both brand new to mainstream audiences and deeply ancient, if you count Morse code as an outgrowth of older communication systems, to conjure a pattern that is half spy thriller, half jazz club jam session. In a single stroke, he managed to brand the series so effectively that producers for the next half-century would rely on that very same trick. That is the power of bold, inspired composition. In the final analysis, the real legacy of Lalo Schifrin is not just found in the man's prolific output, though it was prodigious, but in the intangible sense of wonder and thrill his music prompts. We can debate if it was pure luck or unstoppable artistry that allowed a 90-second flash of inspiration to overshadow entire film scores. In truth, it is probably a bit of both. Most composers dream of crafting a single phrase so universally recognized that it transcends its era. Schifrin did exactly that. You might be wondering if there is a lesson in all of this for anyone aspiring to create something timeless. Perhaps the moral is that brilliance sometimes emerges from constraints. Perhaps it is that adopting unusual structures and ignoring the standard rules can yield your best work. Or maybe it is simply that you never know which project or which quick assignment will become your legacy. Whatever the case, Lalo Schifrin's story confirms that sometimes the greatest leaps in popular creativity happen when you take a risk on that extra beat, that unresolved note, that curious dash and dot pattern derived from a code older than recorded radio. And with that, you might just rewrite the standards of an entire genre. Thank you for tuning into this step-by-step exploration of how the Mission Impossible theme was conceived, nearly lost, and then triumphantly reclaimed. If you enjoyed this roller coaster ride through jazzy time signatures, stealthy cinematic demands, and the unstoppable cunning of an Argentine composer, be sure to keep your ears open for more stories of iconic music moments. Sometimes, all it takes is a tight deadline, a stroke of genius, and perhaps a little bit of bravery to craft a piece of cultural history that truly is impossible to forget.